training and fundamentals are two things that will potentially save the day, and you can't get away from them if you really want to work on mastering your craft.
Welcome back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. There's a very high likelihood that you enjoy being outside if you're listening to this podcast. And if that's the case, you've probably been outside when the temperatures were a little colder than you like, or at a bare minimum, colder than is comfortable. Your body shivering is an automatic response for survival as it contracts your muscles to generate heat when you're thrown into a situation where you didn't expect to get cold. The energy demand for that is quite high, and the currency of that cost is your calories. I wanted to know just what happens, why, and if we're able to fix it in the field. Who better than to discuss that topic than John Barklow himself? As you'll hear us talk about, John has many years of experience and qualifications that make him the perfect expert in the area. And so I was incredibly grateful for his time, excited to sit down with him, and just humbled to pick his brain for a few minutes as we talk through the metabolic cost of getting cold. And we'll kind of explain what that means in the episode itself, why that happens, how to fix it, how to use gear that you have on hand to fix it, what happens if you can't fix it, and then we start to dive into later in the conversation how to choose your gear based on things like this. There are times where certain types of gear work better than others, and you're going to be kind of surprised, like I was, that what is the latest, greatest, and most popular is not necessarily always the right pick. So here is John Barklow and I as we discuss cold weather survival, especially when you get yourself into a precarious situation, as well as gear choices and how those can affect you as well. Well, John, I appreciate you joining me and coming on. And I think a lot of people who listen to this are probably familiar with you, but we definitely have some people who aren't. So as many introductions as you've probably given to yourself over the years, I'll ask you to do it again, and then we'll kind of jump into the meat of what we want to talk about.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it brief, or I will keep it brief. Yeah, so John Barklow, I've been in the hunting industry about 11 years, worked with Sitka Gear as a big game product manager, and then currently big game and whitetail product manager, and help just frame up holistically the entire product line there. And that's given me a lot of opportunities to just kind of get out and do different things within the industry. But prior to that, I did 26 years in the military, started as a diver, eventually got into special operations with my diving skills. And then that somehow, even to this day, I'm not exactly sure, led to me being one of 12 people selected to basically stand up a cold weather mountain warfare training facility up in Kodiak, Alaska. And that's really the pedigree that, helped me understand how to develop product and how to, build clothing systems and kind of some of those things that, kind of Sick is known for, but also really opened my aperture on survival and really how to endure the elements outdoors, say backpack hunting or in the military, right, on some type of mission where really you're self-supportive, and you really can't afford to leave the field until you want to, right? And so in a military mission, that's fairly obvious, but in hunting and what I brought across is, we spend so much time and effort and money and resources planning our hunts that, we don't want to get out there and be pushed out of the mountains, by a thunderstorm or a freak snowstorm or, some other, unplanned contingency is what I like to call them. So in a nutshell, that's kind of my professional life. And then I've, started my own platform, Knowledge from Storms, which really is just me trying to give back, kind of the knowledge that I received and the interesting crucible I grew up in, to just help hunters be the best they can be. So, and then I'm sitting in front of you, which I'm stoked on.
Well, thank you for joining. A question I've always, this is going to sound like I stalk you. I don't, but I have I have like a personal interest, I guess you could say, in clothing
Mhm.
systems and materials and fabrics, and so I've always loved that side. So I've always looked at, I mean, I've loved some of the stuff that Sitka develops, and knowing that you do that, I've always looked at you as like, man, that's got to be such a cool thing to do. So one question I've always kind of wondered was it the chicken or the egg? So you got in the sense of you got thrown into or asked to do some of this cold water stuff. And so did your desire to be the best at that come as the byproduct to getting assigned to that, or did you already have an interest in it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, I absolutely had an interest in it. If you wanna take a step back, so I just had enormous amounts of diving experience early in my military career. I eventually got sent to, the East Coast and Virginia Beach, and then eventually got transferred out to the West Coast in Coronado, and during that time, I was, just evolving my diving skills and pedigree, and I was teaching guys how to get in and out of submarines, underwater and back inside, and then these combat swimmer operations that they called them, and so I was always around the water and kinda dealing with that, and so, when you live your life in and around the ocean, it's really about, managing being cold and wet a lot of times. But at the same time, and this is pre 9/11, I started to pursue when I got to California really robustly, getting into the mountains and being a competent, mountain climber, rock climber, backcountry skier. Got involved with some mountain guides, and I even considered getting out of the military at one point to become a professional mountain guide and backcountry ski guide. But at the same time, again, pre 9/11, not to say that we didn't have a lot to do, but there wasn't as much laser focus on one particular area of operation. I started taking those climbing skills, those backcountry skills, those mountain warfare skills. At the team I was at the time, they were focused on Northern Asia. It's a lot different now, and so I began to help them figure out different and unique problem sets. How to stay in the mountains, how to stay hidden, how to navigate avalanche terrain, how to go to areas in the mountains that the enemy wouldn't suspect you being, and I was leveraging those skill sets I was developing, on the weekends, so to speak. And that culminated in me getting a phone call probably days after 9/11. I was at an active SEAL team on the West Coast, and the guy who called me I knew, and he was running this facility up in Alaska, and he's like, "Listen, I get to pick anybody I want. We need to do this thing. Obviously, it's for real all of a sudden. We're not just, make believe, so to speak, that we're going to go to war like we're at war." He said, "You're one of the top picks." And even though I wasn't at the time directly, I was directly involved in special operations, but not like working with a SEAL team. He said, "Man, I need you up here." And so that's launched the second almost 12 years of my career, basically becoming the subject matter expert in all things cold water, cold weather, mountain warfare, and cold, really mountain survival. And it's just an amazing run that I don't think could ever be duplicated, but nonetheless, that has led me to where I am today. So my perspective is very unique. It's very, I can teach anybody how to do something in a lot of different ways. That's part of what just evolves from you teaching a diverse, thousands of guys that have diverse backgrounds. But I also come at it from a very serious and kind of um, non-negotiable, like kind of perspective in the sense that this could be life and death. And although it's shifted a little bit from the military, it still can be life and death for us when we go into the backcountry. And so I tend to, come off a little more serious, but it could be serious. And so I want people to kind of be aware of that and take it seriously.
This could be a heart or cart before the horse, but I like loose guidelines.
Oh yeah, me too.
How do you So, keeping in mind with that, how do you take a group of people? who, because whenever you have a natural interest in something, you're going to pay attention. There's going to be a drive to want to learn about it, and there's going to be a drive to absorb as much as you can and to, put that in your memory bank. How do you take a group of people, and let's say it's either backcountry hunters, or let's say that it's experienced backcountry skiers who have been doing it for years. How do you take that group who thinks, that's not going to be me. Like, we don't go in, nothing's that serious. This is kind of over exaggeration. We hear that about nutrition. We hear that about first aid kits. We hear that about everything.
Sure.
How do you take, how do you instill the seriousness of it and create a situation where those people who feel like it won't happen to me take it serious enough to learn it before
Yeah.
they find themselves in it, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Uh, Realistic training is really is really what you have to do. So, we would get in the initial first course up in Alaska, it was 30 days. So you don't have a lot of time. And really, unless you come back and are refitting from something, and even then it's probably not a full day off. Like, you're not taking a day off. And so you'd get people that, maybe have never seen a snowflake, literally, grew up in LA. And then you have other people that, had taken a 30 days NOLS course and were pretty competent. So it's a crawl, walk, run. You have to start with the basics. You assume nothing, because if you're trying to teach somebody, like, quote, your way or your protocol, or you have building blocks to get somebody to that, level of competency in 30 days, or 3 days, 30 days, 3 days, or 3 hours, you have to, you can ramp it up quickly, but you kind of have to get an assessment. And so the first thing is, in training, to kind of knock down the cockiness, that I had, and certainly the group of folks in the military I worked with all had. That was a central component of why they were successful. You kind of got to knock them down. And so, you get done with a 3-day patrol. Everybody thinks they're going to, load up in the trucks or the boats or whatever, and head back and get hot chow and get a shower. And that's when you literally drive them to the ocean or the lake. You have them cut a hole, and they get wet, up to their neck for 10, 15 minutes, depending on the water temperature. You drive their, core body temp down a degree or two, and you drive an urgency to go, okay, now this happened. You have to implement your, survival protocols that we've taught you, and leverage the clothing system that we just gave you and talked all about. And oh, by the way, this is a pass fail, and go, right? And so we've given them all the tools, but you have to drive that urgency, that realism. You have to say, hey, your buddy got shot. Your buddy, is stuck in an avalanche. But now you dig him out, but he's, unresponsive. What do you do? And you do that quickly, and that gets people's attention. And then you can almost go, okay, now, like a friend of mine, Mark Twite, years ago, he crushed us in the gym. Like, after a couple hours of classroom, we go in the gym, and within 20 minutes, he crushed us with this kind of Tabata protocol. And he goes, okay, now that I've got your attention, the real learning can begin. And so I've always kind of taken that aspect of it. And, it's hard to do via social media or just in some seminar. But really what I've learned, personally, professionally, that these things are not a question of if, but when something's going to happen in the backcountry. The longer you go out there, the better the odds are, so to speak, that something is going to happen. And then when it does happen, it really is going to be dependent on your training, your preparation, as to, generally speaking, if that becomes, a good story to tell around the campfire, or it becomes some crisis, life and death situation, right? And those are rare, luckily. But things that start fairly insignificant can spiral out of control if you haven't put that time into your training, to get there. So, long answer, but you really have to, let people know that, these things do happen, that there is an urgency when they do, and that, even if, I've had all this medical training in the past, but it's been years, that, you still have to go back, refresh, because, you're only as good as what you did, yesterday. So,
And that's exactly My hope in doing this is one of the things that I love about the information that you've put out, because I subscribe to Knowledge with Storms. Listen to your stuff, is how simple it is to remember, right? And so if you're exposed to it once or twice, the protocols, the recommendations, and I'm thinking of two in particular that we can cover are such great information, little nuggets that they're bite-size enough to remember, but they're robust enough to matter. And I think that that's the key, right? I mean, you've got people like that will put out really great information, but it's the protocol so robust that people leave feeling like, I mean, I'm not going to remember that, right? Or the protocol is so simple that it doesn't contain anything. Well, okay, if you get cold, you need to rewarm yourself. It's like, well, oh, I mean, that's pretty basic. A question,
Yeah,
and this is gonna be, kind of a silly question, but a
I love
basic
silly
question.
questions.
What makes and this is gonna all lead into rewarming drill and some of these other things that you've done, and that'll make sense to listeners who aren't familiar with that. That was the other thing is we have a lot of folks who have been exposed to some of your content and a lot that haven't. And so for the ones that haven't, I thought there's nobody better. What makes the type of situation that you're describing falling in an icy lake in winter, right? Like, let's say that somebody skiing down, backcountry skiing, didn't see it, fall into a creek or whatever, snowed, whatever. What makes the type of scenario you are talking about different than your everyday cold plunge that people love?
Yeah. The seriousness, the immediate timeline, the consequences of inaction or improper action or being unprepared, right? So, the cold plunge is great, and I do it, or a cold shower. I mean, it was probably 2 years ago. I mean, for 9 months straight, I just decided in my head, I'm like, "I'm not gonna give myself the luxury of a hot shower for the next 9 months until I kill a bull elk, right, with my bow." And so that was kinda what I put on myself. It's like just being a little uncomfortable every day and not, doing something I don't wanna do. And so those little things add up. But those are in, they're controlled situations, and so the gym is a controlled environment. So you can go and do a Tabata workout or whatever the workout of the day may be, and you can crush yourself and you can taste the copper in your mouth from, blowing up your alveoli and your lungs and everything, and lay there on the gym floor and get patted on the back and told what a tough guy you are, and that's awesome. You do that in the backcountry, you're dead, you're a casualty, you can't respond. And so, and the situation you describe of, guy backcountry skiing and falling in a lake, that actually happened to one of our instructors up there. And I won't go through the whole thing, but he's skiing in the back of the patrol. Everybody else, 12 guys probably in front of him, and he goes in up to his armpits. Luckily, he didn't go under and die, but the ice gave way. Incredibly cold conditions, very windy. These guys were students, but this was towards the end of the 30 days, and so they were trained, and of course, my buddy, the instructor was trained, and they immediately went into the protocol, right? And so Kevin, who was the instructor, probably was in a little bit of state of, shock, like, "Oh my gosh, this is happening." The students that it wasn't happening to realized the situation, and then everybody rallied. And, through a practice protocol and gear that was tested and not just bought randomly because me or some review said it was, they knew the capability, which drove confidence, and they were able to manage the situation, right? And so Kevin was able to come out of that alive. That is far different than the controlled environment where, just for fun and somewhat for, just sadistic reasons, you make somebody go cut a hole in the ice with a fire axe that they're gonna get in and do a controlled protocol that teaches you how to react in that life and death situation. That's the difference, right? And so if you haven't practice that. If you haven't done that, if you hadn't taken the cold plunge state of mind and gone and tried to see if your clothing system's really going to work or how your mind reacts, and if you've broken it down to its basic, simplest forms to be able to process in this crisis management mindset, um, you know, you're going to flip a coin to see if you come out alive or not. And that to me is just it's sad because it's something you could control, and everything you could control in an uncontrollable environment, you should to stack the odds of success in your favor.
Reminds me of, I don't know if you know him or have heard of him, Chad Wright, who's kind of an ultra guy and a former
Yeah,
SEAL.
Chad was a former student, actually.
Okay, so, well,
Yeah, I know
you
Chad.
may have,
Yeah,
but he had a great quote. I mean, he's a great guy. He had a great quote where, he had just finished this really difficult workout, hands totally torn up, takes a picture of his hands torn up, and you expect, him to make some sort of a, not because of him, just the way that culture and social media is, some sort of praise about his difficult workout, and he doesn't. Instead, he sort of mentions, and this isn't quoted, but he basically says, my hands being torn up are completely pointless if it didn't produce something in me other than physical fitness. If that fitness doesn't help my family or my friends or me in a difficult situation, then these torn up hands and the great praise that I got from people for doing a difficult work are pointless.
yeah,
And I think that that's a great. In fact, I printed that and put it on my wall because he's right, and it
yeah.
just
I
reminds
mean,
me of
that's
that.
a whole podcast unto itself, but yeah, that mindset, the training drives that confidence, the mindset, the ability that beyond it, it's beyond the physical. It becomes emotional. It becomes psychological. Like there's so much more to gain from the gym workouts. I say it's a tool, right, that can be used. But if all you're getting is big biceps and legs, then you're missing kind of the whole point,
Yeah,
right? And so that's really what I call impactful training does. It's not about going in there and PR and under the deadlift. It's about how does that PR on the deadlift equate to something that, is more consequential.
yeah, usable. I think that that's great. I want to go into the rewarming drill specifically. We kind of keep mentioning it, and I think it's, again, such great information. I want to start with another sort of basic fundamental question. Why, I guess, two parts to this. Why is it bad if we get cold and wet?
Mhm.
And as a part of that, how do we lose heat, right? Because one of the problems with that is you lose body heat. So, why is it bad if we get cold and wet, and what ways are we losing heat from a physiological standpoint?
Yeah, so first of all, nobody likes to be cold and wet because it's uncomfortable, right? So even me, like nobody likes to do that. The human being doesn't like to do that. And when you are cold and wet, depending on the environment, almost any environment, but a lot of the environments that we'll find ourselves out in the mountains, being cold and wet sets you up for things like hypothermia, right? It sets you up for in the stages leading up to that, uh, reduced cognitive function, reduced physical performance. So all of a sudden, if you're cold and wet and you don't understand how to counter those forces of heat loss, which I'll get into in just a second, all of a sudden your hands become numb, and the most basic things like zipping up your jacket or flicking a Bic lighter to start a fire that everybody kind of defaults to as their primary survival thing. Um, all of a sudden that is off the table. And if you can't cognitively function and make good decisions, one bad decision that may have led you to getting cold and wet, but not always, or that first decision after you're cold and wet can often determine the outcome, right? So that one bad decision may lead to a cascading series of other bad decisions. And the longer you're cold and wet, and the closer you get to hypothermia, the worse those decisions are probably going to be, right? And so if you understand how the body loses heat, then you, if you find yourself in that situation, understand how to counter those forces, right? So we always go back in training to the basics. It's not about the jacket I build or the clothing system you have. It's about how it works and how, with the knowledge you have that weighs nothing in your head, how you can leverage that to execute on whatever you need to do. So, if we're just sitting here talking and our bodies are putting off heat, right? It's just evaporating the heat, and so that's driven by this metabolic engine we have that we feed with food and water. So that's our, gas in the tank. And so you eat a meal and you're like, "Oh, I'm a little hot," and you take your jacket off, and so we use clothing to regulate that body temperature. I just took my insulated shirt off because I was getting a little warm, right? If I get cold, I'll put that back on. But, um so there's evaporative cooling and then there's convective cooling. So if I am damp, say get to the top of the ridge, we've hiked, I've over sweated my system, and I don't immediately warm up and protect myself, that wind blowing across my body, especially if I'm damp, is going to quickly strip heat away quicker than if I was dry. So that's convective cooling. So that's one way. And then the next one is conductive cooling. So if I sit down on the ground, a rock, a log, that's why a foam ground pad is so critical when you sleep, or pine boughs on the bed of a survival shelter, insulating yourself from the cold object, because your warmer body at 98.6 at its core will begin to give up that heat to the colder object. So evaporative cooling, convective cooling, conductive cooling, if you understand these things, you're like, oh, I'm it's windy. I need to block the wind. So maybe you put on a windstopper jacket, and then you're like, oh, but I need to trap that body heat to capture it within the system. So you put the puffy jacket on. Then you sit on the ground and you're like, oh, I need to insulate myself from the ground now and maybe put up a shelter to block the wind, but also prevent conductive cooling. And all of a sudden you put these basic pieces together with the kit you have, which is more capable than ever, and it helps you reverse that cycle of being cold and wet and helps you start to dry and start to warm up. And then if you make that initial good decision based on training, based on that reaction you have, then all of a sudden things start to get better, and hopefully, you don't make that series of poor decisions.
I want to talk about specifically talk about like this. I hate using big words, but this is the only one that's coming to mind. The metabolic cost of this, right? The energy cost of getting cold and the consequences that come with getting cold and wet and hypothermia. But I think it'd be before we get into that part of it, because we keep talking about it. Can you describe kind of what the rewarming protocol is?
Yeah, so the rewarming protocol generated from this training we did with the Navy up in Alaska, and the reason being is, if you're a Navy SEAL, if you're a Navy diver, you're around water all the time. If you're swimming to the beach, to invade North Korea, right, or do a special reconnaissance, maybe I should say, and that zipper on your dry suit leaks, and you get to the beach with all your guys, and you're wet from the waist down, or your whole body's wet because you got cold that way, or you did a night parachute jump and that dry suit leaked, or all of a sudden you did that night parachute jump, and it was warm, but all of a sudden now you get in a boat and that boat is screaming across the ocean at 70 miles an hour. Again, you need to figure out how to counter those forces of heat loss to warm up and dry out so you can be combat ready, right? Mission effective or hunt ready, if you want to put it in civilian terms. And so, again, to create a training protocol that drove urgency, that helped build that confidence, that kind of instilled and solidified those training points that we had given those students up to that point, but were only theory and not reality. We came up with this rewarming drill. Now, there's two versions, but the one that's often talked about is called the static rewarming drill. It's the most involved. It's, hey, you and I are in the middle of nowhere, Kyle. Uh, you know, I fall in the creek on the backcountry ski tour. We're miles and miles from help. Maybe you can't even call a SAR asset because of the weather, so no bird's going to fly. And you're like, we need to manage the situation right now because we don't have time to wait for anybody. Like, we are our own rescue. It's self-rescue or nothing. And so that's where, once you're wet, we used to do it with a doctor based on water temperature, but, the students would generally get in at the end of probably a 4-day, I think it was a 4-day, training patrol. So you're a little run down, you're not getting as much sleep, maybe you haven't kept up on your hydration or your fueling, you're kind of at, a little bit of a low, and your mind is thinking about getting that hot shower and food, that's when we would go and put them in a cold lake, right? With their hiking clothes. So they had their pack packed, however they left the field, which we always told them to leave with the expectation you're going to spend another 24 hours, have water, have food, have everything organized, dried out, etc. In pairs of two, they would put their pack down, they'd take off their electronics, they'd keep their hiking clothes on, boots and everything, and they'd march right into the the lake oftentimes, up to their neck, and they'd spend anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, depending on water temperature. And what they would do is drive their body core temp down a degree or two. And the reason we know that is because several classes swallowed RFID chips and they could measure the body core temp. But it would drive a sense of urgency when they got out because your hands are going to become useless within 5 minutes. Your thinking is going to start to become clouded, right? And so you get out, you grab that pack, and in this slow, methodical, practiced routine, you and your buddy would immediately seek shelter with clothing, then seek shelter with a tent, and then go through their survival protocols, right? So once they mitigate the initial risk of the situation and kind of get things under control, and they're wet with inside their tent, based on the clothing and equipment we gave them, they were able to slowly start to fuel their metabolic engine, which created that body heat we talked about, which drove the moisture out of the system, warmed them up from the inside, allowed them to make better decisions. And then, long story short, we wouldn't play it out necessarily for 24 hours, but what it allowed you to do is say, hey, in the worst, quote, worst case scenario, I can manage the situation and wait for that SAR asset, wait for the, our friends to come into the inReach message. I can warm the guy up and then stabilize his leg from, the femur fracture, and sit on him, but we're not going to die. Right. And so the confidence that gives you to then go out and, yeah, if you're a little wet, yeah, if you're a little cold, you got hit with the high alpine snowstorm, fell in the creek crossing a log. It's not a panic, push the SOS button or make a series of bad decisions. It's like, nope, take a deep breath, focus on the fundamentals. We can manage this. So that's kind of the high level framework of this thing.
That's great. So I want to go back through these because you described it perfectly, and I think for someone who's, I'll link the video that you did with it may be other places, but the one with Eastman's that you did in
That's a good one. Yeah.
2015.
Yep.
I think it just, I mean, step by step really walks through it well. So a couple of things in there that I think if I knew nothing about it, people may wonder like, God, how does that work? So one is if you should have some kind of system, tent system, sleep system, shelter or some kind
Shelter.
if
Yeah.
you've got it, right? So you set that up. The two parts that I want to focus on is number one, driving that metabolic engine, which makes me think you're suggesting they try to eat at some point. And then as a second part of that, as you start to do that, you said the moisture starts to evaporate away from you. I know what that means, but I think in that video will show what it does a great job showing what that means. Can you explain either we can go through it in two parts if you want, but how do you fuel that metabolic system? How does the moisture seemingly magically evaporate from what is soaking wet clothing to basically drying you out?
Hmm. Yeah. So one kind of leads to the next. So I talked about, our body is this metabolic engine that runs on food and fuel. I talked about how it puts out heat, i.e., right, evaporative cooling, things like this, and how we could trap that body heat within a clothing system to kind of stay warmer, make that micro climate or environment within the clothing system warm. And so that's how we kind of stay warm outside. So it doesn't matter if we're doing the rewarming drill, if we're on a backcountry elk hunt, or quite honestly, even if we're sitting in a tree stand or ground blind hunt whitetail. If we want to stay warm in cold weather, we need to continue to fuel that engine, just like your truck. You can't just go drive infinite number of miles without stopping to refuel that truck. And so when you're in a situation like we're describing where you're cold, your body starts to consume enormous amounts of calories to produce body heat to try to reverse the course of body heat loss, right? It's going to fight to stay alive. It's going to shunt blood to the fingers and the toes at the expense of them, to keep the organs in your core alive. And so one way to reverse that is as those calories are getting burned off, you need to kind of keep up or even uh, double down on the number of calories. So it's like a hot drink will help that a lot of times because hydration is such a critical thing to cognitive function. So you can get a hot drink in somebody. You can immediately eat some trail food. But at a certain point, you get to the point where you've stabilized the situation, say inside your tent, and you're like, okay, like, I don't care what time of day or night it is. It's like, we're in this situation. I'm shivering because my body is trying to create body heat. I need to help that. I'm going to, boil water and make that Mountain House meal. I am going to eat the Snickers bar. I am going to, consume the food gels, whatever it is, to get calories on board so that I don't go into that calorie deficit, which likely if you're in the backcountry, you're already in. But you need to keep up on that because if you don't, as your body continues to shiver and you get colder, you're not going to be able to reverse that trend. And that's where you start to fall off the cliff, right? So, fueling, what I call fueling, food and water, is such a vital component that we don't give it its due. Like we all want to eat, we all like to eat, but it's actually can be a matter of life and death quickly in this type of scenario we're talking about, right? And so, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to my mind when I think about this is the metabolic expense, the cost, the currency of keeping you alive in the cold is very, very, very high. And so, like,
It's
one
huge.
recommendation that we'll make for people going on, a question we get a lot is like, well, as the season wanes on and we've got a late season tag, or I'm going on a backcountry hunt, what should I take? Is warm stuff, things that because the more food that you bring or drinks that need to be warm, the less demand it's going to put on the system, the more efficient you now are with that energy and the less that you're burning. So, like, whenever you talk about, accidentally getting submerged in a creek, th- the very, um, the very nature of shivering is to initiate contraction of the muscle to generate heat, which can increase expenditure 5 to 6 times versus sitting stationary. So you were so spot on in saying, man, this is not like kinda need to do it. This is really, really important. So two questions that I have as an extension of that before we go into the evaporated part of thing, now that we talk about really stoking the system. Number 1, should we get rid of Bics, lighters as an expectation? Because you're right. If you've never even been submerged, just cold, the idea of trying to get a lighter lit is almost impossible. 2, is there, because you hear a lot about this, especially in the mountaineering world, is there a macronutrient that, and again, we're not talking about ideals, so it's probably like just pile anything in that you can. Is there a macronutrient in your mind that is important or people should focus on as a contingency?
Yeah, so remind me of the second part if I forget, but
Okay.
as far as, like, the big lighter goes and all that, like, that again, a whole separate podcast just on survival priorities and maybe just on fire alone, but I generally speaking with modern technical gear and clothing, you don't need to carry a lot of extra anything. Like, I don't carry any extra clothes, period. I carry extra socks, some extra glove liners. I might carry a pair of mittens in the winter just in case somebody loses gloves or I lose gloves. But the other one is the ability to strike a flame or a spark to start a fire. So, your stove's useless if you lose your one Bic lighter, right? So there's a lighter there, there's a lighter in my possibles pouch, but there's also a windproof lighter that I can just press with a thumb. Gross motor functions will get it to work, right? So Bic lighters with the little childproof thing. I mean, even in the best of circumstances, sometimes can be difficult. So I pry those off, but I have extras because the wick will get wet. or the flint, and then you can dry them out, but it takes time. So you have multiples of those, and you have a windproof lighter. I don't like matches for the single fact that I can barely strike one of those windproof, waterproof matches in good conditions. I always tend to break them. So I tend to shy away from them, and I go to, that's where you can have a magnesium rod and striker, a ferro rod, something with gross motor functions. We can go back to talk about gross motor functions in, shooting and crisis scenarios, and anytime you're shooting a bull with your bow, like whatever, or this crisis scenario where, I just I'm only going to be able to do things at a kind of a gross motor function to start. Like I said, it might be even difficult to zip up your puffy jacket. So you want to train to those things, and you want to make sure that you're able to do that when and if it gets to the point where you're ready to start that fire. Um, when it comes to heating yourself up, your body is the single best source of heat you have. A fire in the backcountry to me is a luxury. There are times, environments, times a year, scenarios where I've not been able to build a fire. There's no wood to build a fire. I've known guys that have gone on caribou hunts and high country hunts and like brought the teepee tent with the stove. And I'm like, why would you do that? And they're like, yeah, there was no fuel to burn.
Mm.
And so it's a luxury, but this metabolic engine, I keep calling it, is the single best thing we have. And so, what are you going to put in it? Are you going to put in it the lowest grade of fuel, the highest grade of fuel, understanding that the fuel, the food you can bring is a limited resource. You can only carry so much realistically. And so trying to get like the most bang for your buck. To answer your question in a very long-winded way, I tend to default. There's a couple things, but I tend to default to fats as my kind of my primary. I mean, people may call me, you don't have to be keto, right? But I probably eat a more keto-ish diet than I don't. But I also bring those simple carbs, right? So when I'm getting out of the water, I'm in my tent, I'm in my sleeping bag, and I'm like, I need calories, I need them now. That's where the energy gels and chews come from. The Snickers bar, those simple sugars that just jack my metabolism. But then I have to start feeding it with protein and fat. To like the analogy I use is when you start the fire in the cabin, you start with that oak log, some paper and the oak log, and it gets going really fast, but it's going to burn out quick. And that's where you put the oak log on. If you're back east, yes, we burn oak logs. And so it's long burning, or some alder that's going to burn long and hot. And so that's what's going to sustain you throughout the night. And then if you get in that little dip, you can always throw some pine log or simple sugar back on. And so those are the things that I'm looking at. Like everything, this is obviously based on, over 30 years of experience, but like everything I do ties back to kind of the fundamentals, right? It's like this, I do this because of this, and I do this because of this. And it's not a paranoia, it's just a preparation for, just life in the backcountry that can often be, other than ideal.
Well, and it works, right? I mean, that is the MO that we stand on for us is master with nutrition, master the basics, do them with relentless consistency, and for most people, that's going to get you further than anything you've ever done before with trying all of these little
A
pockets
hundred
of
percent.
stuff, all
A
over the
hundred
place.
percent.
So, I mean, I think you nailed the nutrition part of it. That was excellent, excellent and brief explanation. Um, if so, evaporative, how does a clothing system or clothing materials, how does that move water off of us to the point of where we could be soaking wet and cold to completely dry?
Yeah. So, I call this kind of modern survival. Modern technical apparel, sans brand, most of almost all of it is at a higher level than any clothing was 20 years ago, right? But I need to put a caveat on this to say, if you're still wearing cotton, if you're still wearing denim, if you're still wearing flannel, um, nothing I'm going to tell you is probably going to work and save your life. But I'd say the vast majority of people, and certainly your audience, is probably moved on to some type of technical apparel, right? So that is polyesters and nylons, synthetic insulations and treated down, things like that. Even wools are great. But if you have a modern technical clothing system, it is capable of amazing performance. But most people don't understand the performance. They just kind of trust, say, somebody like myself saying, hey, it works. And they've never put themselves into a situation where they've had to truly test it, which I think is a mistake. And that's part of the training protocol. But if you have these modern technical systems, a couple things come to mind. One, they don't absorb a lot of water. Now you may think they do, but really in hindsight, they don't really absorb a lot of water, especially compared to 20 years ago. The second thing is that because they don't absorb a lot of water, they also dry a lot quicker than anything we've ever had, in modern times. And so when I have a technical clothing system, I understand that my body's this metabolic engine, the most trusted source of heat I have. I understand how to fuel and drive that metabolic engine, that when I get cold, wet, run down, tired, etc., or in this case, this, worst case scenario rewarming drill, and I start to fuel my body, I have these technical uh, clothes on. People say, why don't you take those clothes off as soon as you get wet, before you get in your sleeping bag, before you get in your tent? Like, why would you, like, it's idiotic for you to not take your clothes off. And I'm like, yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from. I know why you're saying that. And if you don't have a technical clothing system, then you're right. But you have to continue to play it out beyond just the initial decision, right? So let's play it out and say, okay, I get wet. I'm crossing the log. I'm crossing the beaver dam, which has happened to me. Or you're walking on the side of the creek and the snow gives way, and next thing you know, you're chest deep, or you fall off the back of the pack raft in Alaska on the moose hunt, right? Or you get hammered by that quick moving afternoon thunderstorm in the high country of Colorado. There's lots and lots of scenarios. If the first thing I think I'm going to do is strip down and build a fire, you're dead. Like, you're just dead, right? But if you understand your survival priority, shelter being the number one survival priority, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, generally speaking. Understand fire is not in the top three as a general statement. That we as humans, ever since the first caveman put on a loincloth, have used clothing as our first line of defense, right? So I put that, instead of taking clothing off and exposing myself to the elements, I put clothing on. I know it'll dry out. I know my body, I can generate heat. When I do that, you create a temperature difference, right? So it's hotter inside, right next to my skin, than it is generally outside. And so that heat is going to push through the temperature gradient. It is going to push the moisture out, because the moisture is going to try to seek equilibrium. The heat's going to try to seek equilibrium. And so if I continue to fuel my engine, and that may be, hey, I fueled myself, but now I got to get out of the tent and walk around the tent, or I got to do jumping jacks or push-ups to jack that metabolism, jack that body heat. It is going to push the moisture out of that technical clothing system. And to your point, and we show it in the video, and it only happens in just a few short hours, we do what I like to call cook my system dry. It's unbelievable. But if I don't do that and I choose to strip down and bail in my tent and get in my sleeping bag, naked, or let's just say I brought a second set of base layer. Okay, great. You're warm and comfortable for, immediately almost. You're like, man, we just dodged a bullet. But now you have this cold, wet, damp clothing sitting at the bottom of your tent that's staring you in the face. All of a sudden, I can't put it back on and hike out of the field when the weather clears, right? I can't get out and fix a tent anchor. I can't go, flag down the rescue party that's going to, because my clothes are sitting there probably now frozen in a pile. So
Yeah.
all you've done is put off the inevitable. Whereas with, again, these technical systems, and sorry if I'm getting fired up, but it's so important for life and death,
I love it.
that I bail in And yes, it's uncomfortable. And yes, it's going to be a little weird at first, but I know from experience that with the proper clothing, with the proper sleeping bag, that I am going to dry that base layer out. Then I'm going to dry the mid layer out. Then I'm going to push all that moisture to the insulation layer, say my puffy jacket or my sleeping bag. But modern installations are meant to manage that moisture, and even though they may still be wet, the outside of my sleeping bag or my puffy jacket may still be wet, even the outside of my windstopper layer. If my base layers are dry, my body can better thermoregulate itself. I don't need to now give it as much food and water, which is a finite resource in the backcountry. And then when the weather does clear, say the next day, we're like, okay, hey, we good? Yeah, we're good. Like, let's get out. Let's start walking. And that walking will generate more body heat and dry me out. Or I can take a layer off if it's sunny, or I can use the wind to my advantage to now strip that moisture away through evaporative cooling because I understand these fundamentals and how to use them to my advantage. And now I don't need to call for rescue. Now I can continue to hunt the next day. If I've spent my 2 weeks of vacation and thousands of dollars and years of applying for tags, it's like I don't have to get driven out of the mountains prematurely. I can leave on my terms. And although it's a little uncomfortable up front, you're far better prepared to manage the situation, either to save your life or to save your hunt, and continue forward. So everything begins to be tied together and focuses right back on the fundamentals and the basics, which anything in life, be it doing a deadlift, shooting a pistol, whatever it is, always goes back to those fundamentals.
Yeah. So to kind of summarize, you begin by trying to
Yeah,
get.
I gave you a lot there. Sorry.
No, it was excellent. It was excellent. You begin by putting up a shelter, which I think most people wouldn't do. And you have to do that because if not, you're exposed to the wind, and that's going to wreck you sooner than anything because of exposure, continued evaporative or loss of
Cool. Yep.
heat,
Yep.
and you're just screwed. So that's number one. Second is you get in your sleeping bag or any sort of a dry shell of some kind like a sleeping bag. And what begins to happen is after you get in the sleeping bag and you begin to eat, what begins to happen is that heat will start to dry you essentially from the inside out as that
From the
moisture
inside out.
moves from the inside and then out. And then obviously that's going to dry you. You made a great point because the whole time you were talking about, okay, you can take off your clothes and throw them at the end of the tent. I thought, man, I've woken up and had a hard time getting boots on when it's been cold, much less like that's just
Yep.
gonna wind up in a pile. And so you're right. Like, how are you gonna now? What are you gonna do? You may be warm, but you're kind of in trouble the rest of the time. So a couple of questions specifically related to gear that come from that. First one would be, should we stop using down sleeping bags, thinking that synthetics would pull moisture out better than down? Because, of course, down is known for being really, really great if it's dry and cold. But, in some of the downs, I suppose no one can speak better to this than you, may be better against that now as far as being able to get rid of moisture or being resistant to moisture. And two, is there a place for I'll just use the brand name, like a Gore-Tex membrane of some kind to trap that heat more, or does it prevent moisture from moving out?
Yeah, that's a great one. I might forget that one on the tail end of this answer. So if I do, that's a great we need to talk about that. I'll just talk about lofted insulations, so puffy jackets, sleeping bags, right? What I call static insulation, i.e., those are intended for when you're stationary and you need to be very stingy with your body heat, right? Best source of heat you have, you want to be stingy with it because that's created by fuel, which is a finite resource we can carry into the field. I would say, sometimes I've been, you know, painted as anti down. I'm not anti down, I'm pro synthetic. I'd say if you're new to this, start with synthetic puffy jackets and sleeping bags. The margin of error is far less. You can literally get them wet a lot of the most modern, like a Primaloft type insulation. You could literally soak it in a bucket of water. My sleeping bag's completely drenched. This has happened to me more times than I ever care to admit, but it will continue to keep you warm to a certain point, right? It won't completely lose its loft. And the loft is critical because the loft is what captures your body heat and keeps this warm micro environment inside. If you're going to the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, Canada, going on that pack raft hunt, float trip, whatever it is, synthetic insulations, because you're around water, are going to be your best choice. They come at a little bit of a weight penalty, and they're not as compressible as down, but they're super durable and dare I say, idiot proof, right? Whereas treated down, so traditional down has no place in any backcountry person's arsenal, in my opinion. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're going to climb Mount Everest, if you're going to do really high peaks in very arid environments, yes, probably. But why would you not use treated down? And let me explain what treated down is. Treated down is basically, standard down feathers, a lot of times gray goose down. And those individual feathers are treated with a durable water repellent treatment. And what that does is that limits and helps prevent a down garment, be it a puffy jacket or sleeping bag, from immediately becoming compromised from moisture and losing all that loft. So a lot of times, if you get something wet that has down in it, it compresses the down feathers, they lose their loft, and you have something that doesn't even look like it's got insulation in it. And like I said, once you lose the loft, the garment's ability to trap body heat and keep you warm is, in some respects, incredibly compromised. But
Because the distance between your skin and the ambient air is what warms you, right? So the way that you're describing it
correct,
is,
that micro environment you can create inside that clothing system,
yeah,
right? So if you have a really thick down puffy jacket, it's going to trap a lot of that body heat, and so it's not going to readily give it up, and so it's going to be really warm inside that jacket, right?
yeah.
Like if you have one on, say at a 20-minute rest break, and you go to take it off and you unzip it, you can feel heat pour out of the jacket. That's because it's trapping it in there. If that down is compromised and you begin to lose that loft, the more loft you lose, the less area that body heat has, and it's going to quickly squirt through that garment and not keep you as warm, right? Not keep that microclimate as warm. So, but modern treated downs are as good as they've ever been. And so, if you're experienced, if you're in the Rocky Mountains, like, I am, I'm not exactly sure where you are. I think you're local, or the desert Southwest or someplace like that. It's like, yeah, there's a great case for treated down, lighter weight, more compressible, all those things. It really comes down to shooter's choice nowadays, but I'd say if you're inexperienced or going anywhere around water or a wet environment, synthetic and any other thing, I think we can use treated downs. When you talk about the laminate is an interesting one. So, uh, depending on how breathable it is, so we'll just use Windstopper is an example, right? It's a breathable laminate. So if I have a Windstopper jacket on and I get wet, I'm not going to take it off. I'm just going to throw everything on, puffy jacket right on top, bail into sleeping bag, and ride it out. At some point, I may choose to take that Windstopper jacket off because it's got a little barrier in there, and so it's going to slow down that transfer of moisture through the garment, right? But if I have rain gear on, really no matter what rain gear, Gore-Tex or any of the others, they're not gonna breathe nearly as fast as you need them to dry your system out. And so if you imagine, like, getting out of a football game, right? And everybody has to funnel out just a couple exits, like it backs up and it takes time. They'll all get out, but it's gonna take a long time and you're gonna, go get another hot dog and a beer before you get through the exit. So if you have a laminate on like rain gear, you're best to take that off, put the puffy jacket on, or if you get into shelter first, eventually, okay, I'm stabilized. I'm not going to die. Take that rain gear off, put the puffy jacket back on, keep the other clothes on. The rain gear's not going to absorb any water. If it freezes, you can literally just shake it out. The ice is going to fall off, right? But if you don't, it's going to slow and impede the progress of the moisture moving through. And you'll often find that you're actually going to be damp right inside that rain layer because it just needs more time to work its way through. And there's a whole thing about the temperature gradient gets less and less the farther away from your body it gets. And so to help yourself, you're better off taking any kind of rain gear off.
Can I throw a big wrench in this along the same lines with the same topic of rain gear?
Yeah.
Two-part question. Why is wearing rain gear or something impermeable to air like that so helpful in staying warm even if it's not raining? And two, and may be one of the most misunderstood things about gear, I think, is should you wear that close to skin or outside of your out exterior layers, outside of your pants, or if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the first part of the question, real quick?
What value does having some
Oh,
piece
yeah,
of
yeah,
gear?
yeah.
Yeah.
So rain gear, wind stopper, those are going to block wind from stripping body heat away through convective cooling. So, if I'm sitting at the glassy knob and it's sunny out, but cool and windy, putting on my rain gear or windstopper jacket is going to keep me warm because it is going to, again, trap that body heat within my clothing system, right? It's going to keep my skin warm and dry, and it's going to block that convective cooling from the wind. So that's why putting it on, you can almost immediately feel you warming up because it's instead of that heat evaporating away, you've trapped it inside. That's what you've chose to do with that rain layer. Um, the problem with those are if I have that rain gear on and it's rainy and I'm moving and my body is this source of heat, as long as it's warmer inside my clothing system than outside, that moisture is going to get pushed through or it's going to stay outside, right? Or like I'm going to generate sweat. And as long as I can push that sweat through because it's differential between inside and outside with humidity and temperature, it's going to move to seek this equilibrium. Um, I think one thing people don't talk about is that even no matter what laminate you tend to put on, you have to do what I call become an active participant. You can't just expect to put rain gear on and move at the same pace you did without rain gear and not overheat the system. Again, that analogy of trying to get out of the stadium, I'm going to have to slow or moderate my pace to make sure I can manage. That's where pit zips come in and like dumping heat through the center front zipper. All those things are going to help. And, different laminates perform at different levels, but like you can't just put them on and expect that you don't have to modify your behavior with different clothing layers.
Hey, I was gonna say, I think that's a great example of case use, right? So if your expectation is to move a lot with this, you're going to be hot. It doesn't, there's no, I mean, the very reason rain gear works is because it's impenetrable. Well, that's going to mean the opposite direction as well from moving sweat. I've gone to where I take it whether there's going to be rain or not for the simple fact of the wind blocking when I'm glassing. That's why
Yeah.
I tend to get colds when I stop. The first place I noticed this was latex gloves. So I'll be skiing and I'll put a pair of latex gloves on and then put, some mittens over the top of that. And it's just, way warmer. And whereas before I thought, okay, well, let's put these out, put the impenetrable layer, the latex gloves over the top of it. It's like, well, that's not near as warm because it would compress the insulation, right? And so
Yes.
you lose the insulative property of the
Yes.
jacket. And so I remember reading something of yours where it was like, well, that makes more sense. Where you said, look, where these wind blocking layers next to skin, as opposed to what a lot of people think, and it makes sense, right? You wear an insulated layer and then you put this laminate layer over the top of that to keep it from penetrating your insulative layer. But it's like, well, it's now it's compressing the insulative layer and it's not doing as good of a job trapping the body heat because it's not next to skin where you're the hottest. So
Yep.
yeah, I thought that was interesting. I've taken
Yeah,
up. Oh, go ahead.
if you wanna get the best breathability out of any laminate, again, going back to the stadium analogy, the closer to your skin you can wear that laminate, the better or more efficiently it's going to breathe, and the reason is because you've just cut the distance between yourself and your skin, right? The hottest part of your body. And so it's going to have a quicker, easier path to push through because of that temperature differential. It's going to be warmer inside than outside. Every layer beyond your skin, you begin to lose a little bit of that heat. So let's just say it's 98.6. Like you begin to lose heat the farther away it goes, right? And so if it's a windy day, and I don't want to confuse people, but like if it's a windy day, if it's windy conditions, if I'm above the tree line, if I'm in Alaska, Canada, those places, a lot of times I will have, a light, thin windstopper layer directly over top of my base layer. And then if I need additional insulation, let's say like some type of fleece, because it's cold and I need a little bit more to trap that body heat, to regulate that temperature, right? To manage my uh the heat dumping away. I'll put that mid layer directly over top of the windstopper layer. And people are like, well, why would you do that? Isn't that just the opposite of what you need? And I'm like, well, no, what I need is to block the wind. And now I need a little insulation on top of that. It's going to trap inside, it's going to help push the moisture through. But when it goes through, it's going to hit that insulative layer and still going to trap body heat and keep the whole system warm. But I'm wearing it that way because I need to hike, I need to climb, I need the skin, and I need to push that moisture through efficiently, or it's just going to get trapped and I'm going to get damp on the inside. And so I tell people there's no perfect way to wear a clothing system. And really, there's no rules on how to wear a technical clothing system, except just don't put cotton into that system, right? So you and I may go out on a ski tour and you may have something completely different than me, but as long as it works for you to manage your body heat, manage your moisture, there's no right or wrong. It's what works for you and what works for me.
So much like everything, right?
Like
Nutrition or
everything.
fitness or the way you shoot your bow. I mean, there's fundamentals, but outside of that, it's like it's yours. I mean, the thing I tell people is, they'll say, "Well, is this the right way I should do it? I feel so much better." I'll say, "If it's in complete violation of what I said and you feel better, you win. You're the litmus test. Don't follow me, follow what, works best
Yeah.
for you." It's
Yeah.
it's funny, it's interesting to hear for me to hear you talk because you go to forums and you hear conversations online, and I'm a part of many and they're great. But you hear people say, "Well, I want this dream list of rain gear is a good example. Light, durable. I want to bust through thorns, but I want it to weigh less than 10 ounces." Like that's not real. That doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I want that too.
Yeah, I know, I can imagine. I can
Yeah.
imagine. I could talk to you all day, but I wanna be sensitive to your time, so thank you for coming on, sharing your knowledge. I will link everything that I know about you, from your knowledge from storms newsletter, which I think is great. I'm a little upset you haven't put anything out lately because I like reading it so much, but I know you're busy.
Yeah,
You
you'll be stoked why I had to stop for a couple years. So
Well, that makes
I've
me really
let's just
excited.
say I've not stopped writing.
And there's a great backlog too. I'll link the,
It's
video
like a
summaries.
hundred and some articles on there. Yeah.
It's it's a I mean, it's awesome, it's well done, it's concise, but really robust as far as content. I'll link the Montana Knife series that you just did. I mean, you got
That's been
so
fun.
much
Yeah.
good stuff, and I want to include it for people because it's been huge for me. So thank you for coming on. I could talk to you all day. I hope
Yeah, no,
it's been
I think we could
terrific.
definitely talk all day, Kyle. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Here.
very, Yeah, very, very impactful questions and hopefully answers, that I think that I hope the takeaway is training and fundamentals are 2 things that will potentially save the day, and you can't get away from them if you really wanna work on mastering your craft.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to search the idea of a possibles
Pouch,
pouch
yep,
like you've talked about too. I think that
yep.
concept's great. And so, thank you, John, for everything, for coming on, the knowledge that you have shared from the storms you've been in and everything. I appreciate it a lot. I know the community at large does. And like I said, there's a lot of people who listen to this that aren't in hunting and haven't maybe heard of you. And so I thought I can't know about this and not share that, knowing it could help them as much as it has me. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, thank you.
Like I said, I really want to thank John for his time. We were trying to coordinate this around hunting season getting ready to start, and as you heard, his profession is sort of angled and entrenched in the gear space and in the hunting space, and so he has a lot on his plate. Yet you would have thought that he had made time for a distant relative for coffee. He was very, very kind with his time and just willing to chat with me. So I appreciate that so much. Everything we talked about, the company that John works for, if you're not familiar with it, is Sitka. We will put their information in the show notes if you want to check that out. I will link his newsletter, which is Knowledge for Storms, in there as well, so you can look at that. I will link I'll connect the YouTube series that he did with Montana Knife Company, which are just these short hitting, fast facts about survival in the outdoors, which are all just great nuggets and pearls of wisdom. I'll link that as well. And anything else that I think might be helpful, I'll just go ahead and throw it into. But we want to thank you for listening to the show this week. And as we say every week, if you've got questions for us, topics you want covered, please don't hesitate to send those to us. Those are what we are most interested in covering, and you have to share those with us for us to know. I am done talking. Have a great week, everyone. We will be back again in another couple weeks with another episode.